Hi, this is Matt Bernstein with Skillhance.com, and in this lecture, we are going to be talking about your first podcast. You've been introduced to the concepts behind a podcast. You've also taken a look at some of the hardware and software that you can help produce a more professional sounding podcast. Now it's time to get down in the meat and potatoes, or the nuts and bolts of podcasting. In this lecture, we're going to look in order at each of the steps you need to take to produce your own podcast. By following these simple steps, you'll have a tremendous podcast put together in no time. Let's take a look at what you need to do. Planning your podcast. Before you open your mouth to speak, it's always good to know what you want to say. Nowhere is this truer than podcasting. After all, the purpose of a podcast is to allow an average person, just like you, to be able to broadcast the equivalent of a professional radio or television show right from your own house. Because of this, it pays to treat your podcast with the same level of attention and care that a radio or television producer or performer brings on their show. One of the most essential steps that a producer or performer takes prior to a show's podcast is planning what the show will be about. This means that your first step to a successful podcast is planning what your show will be about. Planning is all about making decisions, and it's not as hard or intimidating as it may appear. As this is your first podcast, an initial decision to make is how long your podcast is going to be. When making this decision, keep in mind that your listeners are used to consistency when it comes to broadcasts. One of the main elements of consistency is length. In other words, their favorite TV show is 30 minutes long. It isn't 15 minutes one day and 2 hours the next. It's always consistently 30 minutes long. So decide on a length that makes sense to you and that will make sense for your audience. Your next planning decision is frequency. How often are you going to produce and release a podcast episode? Again, consistency is important to your audience. Pick a frequency length that you can meet and stick to it. Avoid being overly ambitious. If you tell your audience that you're going to be broadcasting daily and then fail to do so because of other commitments, you're going to lose your audience. Now it's time to decide on your topic. If you're interested in podcasting, you must have plenty to say. Now is the time to say it. Remember that each show can have a theme and you can build topics around that theme. Also remember that several shorter topics can keep your audience's attention focused on what's coming up next. That's not to say that one long topic is out of question. It all depends on what you're planning to talk about. It's important that you make your podcast feel familiar to your listeners' ears. If you make your show sound like things that they are used to hearing, then you'll capture their interest that much quicker.